All right, welcome everyone to our program tonight, Parallel Tracks. We'll just give everyone a few moments to start filtering in, and we'll get going in a minute or so.
And feel free to drop in the chat where you're tuning in from tonight. Here in Madison, we're having a spectacular week of fall weather here in mid-November. I think it's going to be 60 degrees tomorrow.
Wow. That's about what's
One of our
happening
board
here in
members.
California.
How is it in California?
About the same. I'd say we're in the low 60s, at least along Monterey Bay on the Central Coast. So yeah, beautiful fall weather.
Excellent. And I see we've got both coasts covered already, and in between we've got Connecticut, Virginia, California, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Colorado, and the list just goes on and on. Nanaimo, British Columbia is here today. Outstanding.
All right, look at that.
Yeah, welcome everybody.
Excellent.
Yeah, one of our board members just left from the Midwest to go to Florida, and it's raining there. And I talked to him today and let him know what nice weather we're having, because he said, well, that was because he'd left. So thanks, Norm.
It sounds that way sometimes. Well, good evening and welcome to Parallel Tracks, Steinheimer, Silicon Valley, and Steel Rails. I'm Haley Page, the Exhibition and Events Manager at the Center for Rail Photography and Art, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our journey this evening delves into the lesser-known side of Richard Steinheimer's illustrious career. While widely celebrated among rail enthusiasts, Steinheimer, with his background in photojournalism, documented much more than just breathtaking trackside vistas. He also navigated the flourishing landscape of Silicon Valley, and our presenters tonight will tell you more about that in just a few minutes. As a friendly reminder, tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel in approximately 2 weeks. That's youtube.com/railphotoart. Our channel hosts a trove of all of our past programs, all of which are free to view. And the support from our members and donors remains instrumental in bringing these events to life and for us to be able to bring them to you. So our heartfelt thank you for all of that support. So as some quick housekeeping, we use Zoom webinar for presentations, and this means that audience members do not have access to their personal audio or camera during the event, but you can change how you can view the presentation in that top right corner under the icon View. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a number of other icons. Please use that chat for any comments you have during the presentation, and by selecting everyone, you'll ensure that the rest of the audience sees your comment. And please use that Q&A to submit any questions you have during the presentation. As usual, we'll have a Q&A session after the main presentation, so make sure you put your questions in that Q&A, not the chat, to make sure that we see it. So thank you again to all of our regular viewers for tuning in tonight, and welcome to any first-time viewers, for which I'm assuming we have quite a few tonight. Thus is the gravity of Richard Steinheimer. So I'd like to take just a minute or so to explain some of the exciting things that the Center does, as well as some of the stuff we have coming up. The Center for Rail Photography and Art is a membership-supported organization with a mission to preserve and present significant images of railroading, and we accomplish that mission through several programs. We have our monthly online programming series, and this covers a wide range of topics in the world of railroading. We promote these programs through eBlasts and on our social media channels, so make sure to follow us on all of our platforms under the handle Rail Photo Art. All of our online programs are free and available to stream on our YouTube channel. Again, that's youtube.com/railphotoart, and this one will be posted in about 2 weeks. Our next program will be one of our members-only programs, and that will be a deeper look into the Jim Shaughnessy collection, and that'll be on December 12th. Our largest in-person event is our annual Conversations Conference. We just announced the dates of our 2024 conference, and that will be the weekend of June 14th and 16th at Lake Forest College in Lake Forest, Illinois. Registrations will open in mid-January. And last week we sold out in, I think, about 2 months, so make sure you get your tickets early, and you can learn more about last year's conference, about what you can expect at this next year's conference on our website at that link at the bottom there. We oversee a traveling exhibition program. We do not maintain our own museum space. Instead, we partner with institutions to host our shows. Currently, we have 4 exhibitions on display and 3 more available for online viewing. And you can check all of those out on our website. And this is a screenshot from one of our online exhibitions, our Jim Shaughnessy show. And you can explore that through our exhibitions tab on our website. Every year we host an awards contest called the John E. Gruber Creative Photography Awards Program. This year's theme is conveyance. Submissions are currently open and they will remain open until May 1st. Winners of the program receive a cash prize and will be published in our journal Railroad Heritage, as well as Railfan and Railroad. An exhibition of the winners will be displayed at the Colorado Railroad Museum. We also do publications. Railroad Heritage is our ad-free quarterly journal, and that is a benefit of membership. Back copies are available on our website. And our most recent print publication is Rio Grande Steam Finale. If you're looking for a good gift this holiday season for any train lovers in your life, or maybe just for yourself, this is an excellent option, and you can order directly from us on our website. We have our Railroad Heritage Visual Archive, which is a representative collection with over 900,000 images committed, or items, I should say. This summer, we just launched our collection management system, Odyssey, where you can explore many of our collections. So you can explore at that link, railphoto.historyit.com. That is also linked on our website. Lots to explore there. So all of the work we do at the center is made possible by our members and donations. Supports from our community provide over 70% of our funding. So thank you so much for being our engine, and thanks to all of our members who continue to commit to us on an annual basis. You really drive so much of what we do. If you're not a member, but you're interested in joining, please get in touch with us. Membership includes access to our quarterly members-only presentations, discounts to our annual conference, and 4 issues of our journal, Railroad Heritage. And you can learn more about joining us, again, on our website. So much to explore there. Now turning to the main event this evening, I'd like to welcome our presenters. I believe both could be described as Stein stands, a phrase I think we're going to need to coin moving forward. I find it very endearing how their enthusiasm never seems to fade, even after exploring Stein's materials for years. I know both of them have had an amazing adventure putting together this program, and I'm really excited to see what they've uncovered. So Ken Rehor owns a wireless systems company called Proximity Labs, and has had a lifelong interest in trains, and that has only deepened with time. From a young age, trains have captivated his imagination, and that fascination remains to this day. His connection to the legendary Richard Steinheimer began with a trip up to the mountains when he was younger, and that has evolved into a profound and enduring friendship spanning decades. As their connection deepened, Ken grew closer to the Steinheimer family, and that persists through his close friendship with Shirley Burham Steinheimer to this day. And Elrond Lawrence joined the center in 2022 as our acquisitions and marketing coordinator. His love for railroads and vintage highways led him to write the book Route 66 Railway, and his work has appeared in a wide variety of magazines, news and corporate publications, books, and advertising. Being located in Southern California, El has an intrinsic interest in Stein's work, and his enthusiasm is infectious, as you will all find out in just a moment. So now I'd like to turn the mic over to our 2 hosts for the evening, and they'll show us awesome, exciting stuff.
All right. Thanks so much, Haley. I just want to get in a quick thank you to everyone for joining us. It's great seeing all kinds of familiar names and a lot of new names in our chat. So we're all glad you tuned in with us. Ken, should we say any quick introductory statements before we dive in? I'll just say that unlike you, I was not able to get to know Dick very well, but I did meet him at Winter Rail in 1989. And when I was like a kind of a punk teenager, I would hang out in Devore, California with my friends, and some friends that would travel from New York came to would visit, and we'd always drive up and meet them and watch trains. And one day when I was probably about 16, they handed me some issues of Trains magazine, and 2 of them were Steinheimer's Cajon Pass Revisited article and his Mojave Crossing piece, and both just landmark photo essays. And then the other magazine was Ted Benson's All Nevada issue, and talk about magazines that changed my life. Well, about 7 years later, I finally got to meet Dick for the first time at Winter Rail in Stockton, California. And I remember just working up the nerve to get over to walk up to him and talk to him. And I looked up because he's 6'6", and introduced myself, and we talked for a half hour. And so I always like to say that as much as he has mentored me in writing and photography, he also mentored me in how to be a great person. And I feel very honored that I'm able to be a part of preserving his collection and sharing it with all of you.
Well, like Elrond, Dick's photography influenced me greatly at a very young age. About 13 years old, I discovered Cajon Pass Revisited Trains magazine in the used magazine section of my local hobby shop, and it just changed my life. And even though I didn't follow in in Elrond's footsteps of being a commercial photographer, I followed the other parallel track of going into technology. And so it was many years later, in 1998, when well, I had actually written to Dick and Shirley about when I saw an ad showing that they had workshops, and in typical fashion, Dick lost my letter. So a couple of years later, 1998, I was finally able to connect with Dick and Shirley, and she said, "Well, why don't you boys go up to the mountains for a couple of days?" And so I was completely thrown by that, and we got in the car, threw all our cameras in the car. We started driving up to Donner Pass, and he said to me, "So what do you do for a living?" And I thought to myself, how am I going to explain to this train photographer that I work at Bell Labs and I'm an electrical engineer? And I couldn't even get those words out of my mouth before he just started exclaiming about everything about semiconductors and these Nobel Prize winners. And I thought, how in the world does this guy understand any of this technology stuff? And so basically we didn't shut up for a couple of days. We just talked and talked and talked. And I was just blown away by his experience in Silicon Valley. And so I'm really pleased to be able to go through this presentation and explain his professional life. And so it's as we were just joking before this started, I've been working on this presentation since 1998.
And when I moved north in 2000 from Southern California to Silicon Valley I was doing public relations for a tech PR. Never did I dream that Dick Steinheimer had played such a pivotal role in the place I just moved to.
Well, it's also amazing to me because when I first met them, I was living in Chicago, and I've since moved to Silicon Valley. And turns out I live within a block or two of many of the places where he either lived or worked. And so it's very strange walking around knowing that I'm walking in his footsteps. But we're going to take you through kind of a 3-act play tonight. It's going to start with his background in journalism, and then move into how did he get into the technology world, and then how did that move on to railroad commercial photography. There's the notion of kind of parallel tracks. So he always loved trains, and that really led him into journalism, not just photography, but photojournalism and writing. He was an amazing writer, and he had a lot of influences that we'll talk about. But that photojournalism and the journalism track actually led him into Silicon Valley in quite a fortuitous manner. But then at the same time, he was continually photographing and publishing books and magazines and advertising materials in the railroad world, and eventually those converged in the latter portion of his life. But let's start with this one photograph, which I just love, when he was only 17 years old, and this wonderful photograph in Cajon Pass that Shirley found. And it was April 7, 1946, around the curve coming up into Summit. And it just, Elrond, why don't you, we were just talking about this. Why don't you discuss what we were thinking about this photograph?
It's like what strikes us is that, when we all start out, we see trains and love trains. And so your first thought is to photograph the train and just show what you love. And here is Dick making one of his first big adventures up the hill, one of the many mountain passes that would make him famous. But he puts the environment into the shot. And you've got a sense of action, you've got a dynamic angle, I mean, it's a curve, and he's, you know, here's this train climbing up to summit, but you already have a sense of place. And that's something that we realized that, you know, he started out with creativity, and that's what fueled him through his life. And there's like the building blocks of the creativity already. And this just really struck us.
He had his early influences in this idea of visual storytelling really came from war photographers that were featured greatly in Life magazine, W. Gene Smith and David Douglas Duncan, both of which used this concept of storytelling with photographs, either a single photograph, a single powerful photograph, or a series of photographs, plus writing that goes along with that. And of course, later it was Joe Rosenthal, who the AP war photographer who won the Pulitzer Prize for his photograph at Iwo Jima, that was really influential on Dick. What he told me that after he met Joe later, that it was the idea that you had to be there, you had to work hard, you had to just go for it. You had to show up. And certainly Joe showed up, and that was, I think, something that led Dick through all of his sometimes really crazy adventures, which I was thankful to have a few with him, getting stuck in the rocks behind Norden and bouncing his truck off of a couple of rocks. That's a story for another day. But I got a taste of that, and certainly that's how he made some of his most epic pictures. He was so influenced by this notion of Joe's work that even though he went to several different colleges, he picked a college based on what had classes that he thought that he would get the right thing from, and he moved from Southern California to San Francisco specifically to be able to take classes with Joe Rosenthal, and this is the last class. I think Joe also taught him that not to have to take himself too seriously, wearing the dunce cap in the class that day. Certainly from the railroad standpoint, Beebe and Clegg were great influences, not from the standpoint of the three-quarter wedge shot, but just from the storytelling and these beautiful epic books that they produced. And certainly another photographer was Bob Hale, who was a little bit older than him and had done the night photographs, time exposures with flash, but also just ventured into the places he really loved, like Cajon Pass. And remarkably, one day when Dick ended up in the Navy in San Diego, working as a journalist for the base newspaper, he walked into the darkroom and Bob Hale was there. He had no idea that Bob was back in the Navy. So they got to be fast friends, and he learned a lot from him in person.
Right. And that's a great lead in, because this little tiny section here is really exciting for us. And some of these images were literally just shared with me, a day ago. So I need to squeeze in a really quick thank you to our associate archivist, Heather Sontag, who handles the color collection of Steinheimer's overall collection. Adrienne Evans, our director of collection, she handles the black and white side of the digitizing and the processing. But Heather's handling the color, and for this particular program, the color was really what we drew from. But yeah, just a few days ago, Heather wrote me and said, I've just found the Logan box from Whistles Across the Land, which had a couple vintage photos in it when Stein was first trying out color Kodachrome. Overall, he was experimenting with Ansco film, but he overall was shooting with Kodachrome. Well, so she sends me about about 8 pictures, 8 images, and this one I knew was coming, but some of these others I had never seen before. And what strikes us is that Dick was serving in the Navy in 1951, 52, and he was indulging in his rail photography hobby, and what a great place to grow up. But look at this image. I mean, right out of the gate, he's not shooting roster shots again. Now he's giving you that sense of here's the train, but also here's the depot. Works in that Santa Fe sign, so it stands out well. And then he's got steam, and he does it again. And now he's got a different train to work with, but he still works, with some perspective, with angles. And I mean, and then it's a color. It's just beautifully technically well done. And we were just going nuts over this. So, oh, there's a curse on the image, Ken, so we probably should drop that. But these were two really big surprises for us. Heather found these. Here is Dick with his mom in San Diego, and they were very close. And then this other little jewel of an image with Dick and Don Sims, who would become one of his lifelong friends and sharing so many adventures with him. And they're looking at a railfan magazine, which they don't say what it is. And we keep staring at it. And we haven't quite figured out which magazine that is, but it's so fun to see him, just, young, and life is just starting out for him. And these photos are taken by his stepfather, Robert Julian. And so then this one really grabbed me too. It's in Taylor Yard. And gosh, this is one of the older images we found. We believe it's 1949. But again, some of us go to a turntable for the first time and we shoot basically a roster shot on the turntable. But Dick again gives you a sense of place. You've got that great safety sign on the turntable deck itself, the operator's booth, and you could see some of the other engines. And then we found little gems like this. This meet in Fullerton just about blew me away. It has everything. I mean, there's Alco PAs. The engineer has turned and is looking towards Dick. And then here comes a freight with a steam helper and F units in blue and yellow colors. And if you look over to the right, you can see reefer cars with ice hatches lifted. I mean, what a scene. And again, technically, Heather mentions that this was done on Ansco Chrome, I believe. And, she was a little worried it was faded. But I mean, this is pretty remarkable for 1951 for someone who's, at this point, what is he, 22? So, and then
captured just an amazing scene of it's almost like a movie set. It was just all the elements.
Yeah, and the fellow in the tower, exactly, as someone pointed out. And then this one, I actually kind of yelped out loud when I saw this. I mean, here is a Steinheimer shot. Look at that. It's action, it's dynamic, and it's in color. And it's PAs, the signal, it's the scene. Tahachapi Loop, 1951, we believe. And I mean, wow. Wow is what we said. And I think we've said wow for about 24 hours straight. I mean, this one just, to me, it's like, there's all the building blocks of what you see in a Steinheimer image, a low angle, you see bold colors, the lighting. It's just amazing. And so, yeah, we've been pretty blown away. And this is just the beginning. We're hoping there's a few more classics in the works. I think I should probably say we have 30,000 of his slides. We have about 4,200 prints and about 2,700 black and white negatives. And Ken and I were just visiting with Shirley Berman last week, our mom from another, a mom from another family? I don't know. She's our other mom. But and our great friend, and we love her so much, and she is a huge help. She has been just a tremendous help with this program. But we were visiting her, and I have about 8 or 9 boxes of Steinheimer material that will be shipped to the center soon. So there is more to come.
This is just, to me, just a fantastic picture that shows motion, and it's aggressive, and it shows the power. It shows that it's curving around the loop, and it's just amazing that at that era, when it just
at that age, right?
And at that age, it's really remarkable.
Yeah.
He went through a period, this period of going through working both. He started working on this on his college newspaper, and then he went to work for the Glendale News Press as a photographer. Then he went into the Navy, and he came back to the news press as a writer, actually. But it really showed that he did a lot of writing as well as photography. It was just that storytelling. And then in 1956, he moved up north and became a full-time journalist with the Marin Independent Journal. And even then, he was both a writer and photographer. And at times, he was also served as the editor of their weekly magazine as well. And here's a couple of images from that era. He had the excitement of seemed like more than a car fire, but it was it looks like a pretty substantial total loss with that vehicle. And then on the other extreme is he won top prize in the California Nevada Associated Press photo contest for this photo of flooding and this poor dog looking like he didn't know what to do next. So life at the in photojournalism and journalism was pretty exciting at times, I guess.
Yeah, and I could just hear Dick. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I could just hear Dick. As he's snapping the picture, I can imagine him telling the story later, going, "That poor dog's like, I'm so close to the fire hydrant, but I can't get there."
Exactly.
Because he had that great twisted sense of humor.
Yeah, exactly. His journalism career actually brought him kind of the I think it was the assignment of a lifetime when he was sent to photograph the activities at a Fairchild semiconductor plant in Marin County in San Rafael, California. And it had been there a few years because Fairchild was formed in 1957 and been cranking away at this with this factory. And he went there, and they loved his work so much they offered him a job as his chief photographer. And hard pressed to pass up the dogs in the flood or the car fires, but he decided that he wanted to take on the adventure and the craziness of a new high-tech company, especially because they were really going to fund him well with a hefty sum of $5,000 to fund his photographic laboratory and studio. So he moved to Silicon Valley. He moved his family to Palo Alto before it was even known as Silicon Valley, because there was no Silicon Valley. There was basically there was no integrated circuit. There was barely the transistor industry. And this is Fairchild's office where he worked. It's still there, and it's now it's a historical monument. And as one would be expected, there's an AI software company that actually is occupying it at the moment. But it's great that this building is still there, and as you imagine, if the walls could talk. But even while he jumped into his adventure in the tech world, he still managed to photograph trains on a regular basis. So it was always this parallel tracks of. I should say that even when he was in his journalism career, you're probably very familiar with the many magazine articles and the photographs that were all published in Trains magazine and Railroad magazine, and this continued.
His first articles in Railroad magazine, and then he broke through in Trains, and then it became just he and David Morgan just came up with just had that fabulous relationship where Morgan was his champion, and they both just fueled each other. But that shadow. I saw a chat pop up. That shadow on the commutes photo, I was just blown away by this. And then just that beautiful artfulness of the diners. Yeah, journalism roots are showing.
Exactly. It shows that he's not just taking a picture of a train, he's actually capturing a moment in time. Here, the men are either getting on the train to go home or start their day, and this diner. I mean, he captured just everyday life, but he captured it in just such an incredibly beautiful way. This was an extremely prolific period in his life. He got this huge boost by working with Lucius Beebe, who was a huge sponsor of his, to give him this photo credit on the front of this massive book, including 121 photographs by Richard Steinheimer. And this came out at the end of 1963. And simultaneously, which was amazing how he was able to do any of this while actually keeping a job and having a family, was he published this incredible work, Backwoods Railroads of the West, with its companion piece, The Backwoods Railroads in Print, which was something that R.R. Donnelly, the printer in Chicago, that was so impressed with this. They did this, they used this as an example of their printing technique. And he got kudos from Al Kalmbach for what a beautiful work of art this was. It was underappreciated at the time, but as so many great works of art really are, but it went on to influence generations of photographers since then. At the same time, then, he was also dealing with, back to his actual day job, what was going on in Silicon Valley was a huge turn of events that would actually change the world. His boss, his direct boss, Bob Noyce, who founded Fairchild, he and his colleagues invented a new process for actually putting more than one transistor on a substrate, and could actually manufacture this at scale. And this was hugely important for things that were going on in the world. And including the NASA Apollo program. The MIT that built the Apollo guidance computer said that they could not have built a computer that basically was 1 cubic foot. They had to take it flying with them through pretty terrible launches and terrible conditions. This would have not been possible. The space program landing on the moon would have not been possible without the invention of what Fairchild did. And while Dick was there, and what he ended up doing was, none of this existed. This was all brand new. Everything was new. And so he, not only were the scientists and engineers inventing the future with inventing these semiconductor techniques and processes and materials, but Dick was actually inventing the ways to photograph this. He photographed all the activities in the office and did marketing materials, but he also, you can see here, he's got a contraption where he's got a microscope and an enlarger, and it's kind of like a Rube Goldberg device here, but it's he had to invent all of these techniques because none of these techniques existed because these technologies didn't exist. They were literally being invented. So he worked hand in hand with these engineers and the business people to work on inventing these new technologies.
Right.
But at the same time, here's an example of how this little parallel tracks of his work and his kind of hobbies, avocation of railroads went hand in hand. Here he was taking the train from Mountain View down to Monterey.
Monterey Bay.
Out of Monterey Bay, not far from where you live, right?
Yeah, very close.
And this was when you could actually take a train there, which was fantastic, basically right from his home. And he decided he was on a work trip, but he, of course, was always keeping his eye out, and he ended up photographing lightning from a moving train, and it created this incredibly interesting looking piece of artwork. And at the same time, here he had to photograph every activity going on at the office. Here's some engineers and a process development lecture, and I could just imagine how exciting that must be. At the same time, what was he doing? He was also going out and went on so many epic trips in
road trips
to photograph. So he did in April 1964. He did what he called the Around the West trip, photographed all over the West, and then he did so many multiple trips in 1964, 1965, and just came away with so many epic photographs.
Yeah, can I chime in really quick, Ken? Just to add a moment, and it works perfectly with this shot too. These black white images you're seeing it either on a phone or you're seeing it on a laptop or whatever. I mean, we have been privileged to see these prints in person, and they are absolutely magnificent. They are crisp. The detail is mind blowing. The tonal range is astounding. They're masterworks. So if you ever have a chance to see his prints in person, you should do it. It's definitely like an Ansel Adams level experience.
We hope to make that possible in more places.
Yes, we do.
Here's another example of this. You've probably seen this photograph or one similar here. This is in Stanford Curve and Donner Pass. And of course, he was going to a Fairchild semiconductor conference in Squaw Valley, right kind of down the road. And of course, he had to stop and to make some epic photographs around this curve. You've seen color in black and white around this area. He took me to this exact spot, and we ended up I took some black and white pictures right exactly here, and I ended up getting to print them in his darkroom together with him, it just occurred to me it was exactly right here that we were. It was amazing experience. I'm so grateful. But the point was that he always was combining this work and avocation. At the same time, I don't know how he did it. He did yet another book, Western Trains, with a bunch of friends, including Don Sims. And here's a congratulatory letter from one of the executives at Southern Pacific Railway.
Right, he sent like a complimentary copy to them, and
at the time he was also there's many magazines, or there's company magazines from Southern Pacific and other railroads that have his photographs on the cover kind of at the same time. Also, what's going on again? It was these parallel tracks. I opened this one newsletter that he had in his archives, and here was like basically the Fairchild newspaper, and on the front it was about how the Fairchild semiconductors are using for these lunar probes from NASA, and further into the magazine, further in the newspaper, was an entire full-page article about his railroad photography and his new book that just came out. So there was no getting around the fact that he was definitely as it said, he's nutty about photographing trains. And again, there was this epic cover story, February 1966, of his exploration in the winter at Donner Pass, and he got some kudos.
And also all of Southern Pacific. I mean, it was kind of one of those big spectacular photo essays where he was looking at all the different aspects of the railroad. And I think this was like his first really big splash, where Morgan knew he had a hit on his hands, and he gave him a lot of pages.
And even just put his name on the cover. It wasn't just a great picture. It was like it became brand before there were brands. You know.
Exactly. Right.
And he got some great kudos also from David Morgan, but also a young Ted Benson.
Who pointed out that he really, the rest of the issue was just lost on him because he couldn't read anything but the photo section. It was so great. And then so fun to see Morgan's note to Stein, to Dick, saying that we even had a fellow who said the balance of trains was completely lost on him. I mean, how funny to see that little circle through these letters.
Combined.
Right.
So actually, you know, this letter actually shows that it's sent to Dick at his address in Palo Alto. And I keep mentioning Palo Alto, but why do we keep talking about Palo Alto, and when we can get back to talking about railroad photography? I promise you this is a slight diversion that actually does completely tie in railroads and photography as well as Silicon Valley. So if we step back a little bit, it actually I didn't realize this until just recently that it didn't occur to me that it was Leland Stanford that drove the gold spike at Promontory. He didn't completely drive it. It turns out he actually missed, but we'll just ignore that detail for the moment. But he was one of the big four founders of the Central Pacific Railroad. He ended up becoming governor of California. He was a senator for a while. So this guy there was a pretty big deal, both in the history of railroading and in the United States and in the development of California itself. The railroads helped basically changed the completing of the Transcontinental Railroad moved the time from a trip from the East Coast to the West Coast from about 3 months to about a week to 10 days. And that is just overnight. And that opened the floodgates literally for California. But Stanford was involved in a lot of things, and he was not well, and his doctor recommended he kind of take a break. And so he ended up, he loved horses and wine, so he ended up buying some land down the peninsula south of his home in San Francisco, and he created a farm in 1876. And this farm, not surprisingly, was along the Southern Pacific Railroad. And it turns out, fast forward many years, that became Stanford University. It turns out that he and his wife, Jane, had one son named Leland Stanford Jr., and he unfortunately passed away. And so they decided they would create a university to teach all of the world's children. So this university, though, became a center of technology, but not until after World War II. And you might also hear one of the early companies that was fostered from Stanford was Hewlett-Packard. Two guys named Hewlett and Packard were the students of Fred Terman, and Fred Terman was head of engineering and said, why don't you guys start a company instead of just go work someplace else? And that became kind of the seed. This was not possible to raise money. There was no concept of venture capital at that point. As another aside related to photography and electronics and Stanford and Palo Alto was he was a patron of the arts, and he really wanted to be able to prove whether or not his racehorses actually had all four hooves off the ground at any one time. And so he hired Edward Muybridge to develop a technique this is before motion pictures, to be able to have a series of cameras that ended up being electrically tripped shutters, and actually ended up proving this. And this was right down the street in Palo Alto. It's called Palo Alto. This area is called Palo Alto after these two tall redwood trees called El Palo Alto, meaning the tall tree. Well, then now there's one because one of them fell in the late 1800s. But this is the line right along San Francisco Quito Creek, and this line is still there. This bridge that replaced the original wooden bridge, it was double tracked, and this bridge is still there. I just took this picture on the right the other day, and there the line is being electrified right now. And speaking of electrification, something else that was happening that basically was the impetus for what became this technology industry here was out in the East Coast. Bell Telephone Laboratories was looking for ways to improve on communications techniques and technologies, and they developed something to replace tubes they ended up calling it the transistor in 1947. And these three guys, including Bill Shockley in the center, they set off a revolution of technology. And it turns out that Bill Shockley actually grew up in Palo Alto. And by the way, it was Stanford that actually decided to create a city here. There was no city here. There was no town, but he needed a place for his faculty and students to live. So the city of Palo Alto was actually literally built because of Leland Stanford being here. So Bill Shockley grew up here. And after he decided to leave Bell Labs after the invention of the transistor, and he wanted to move back to the West Coast, so he moved back to Palo Alto and decided to start Shockley Semiconductor. So this lineage of, there was Bell Telephone Laboratories that developed the transistor. There was Shockley that literally was the first spin out of Bell Labs to build the transistor. He developed Shockley's semiconductors, but it turns out he ended up winning a Nobel Prize. But even though he was a genius, he was a terrible manager to the point where people just hated working for him. And so in 1957, eight of his best scientists all left in one day, later called the Traitorous Eight, and they formed Fairchild Semiconductor in Palo Alto. From that, over the years, other people left as Fairchild grew. People left, including the founders, Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore. They formed Intel, and from that, this massive array of semiconductor companies. And this only goes to like about 1981. So it shows you what the explosion of technology that was going on here in Silicon Valley. Right. And back to some trains. So when Dick ended up at this, when he moved to Palo Alto, he made sure to buy a house that was right along the railroad tracks. And so he could sit on his roof of his garage and do pan shots of the trains going by. And this is where his house was, in this subdivision here, and that you could see where the Southern Pacific was going, tracks were. And this was a train that was going by with Alma Street on the other side of the tracks. And at the time he was living there, there weren't all the gigantic trees that are now visible in this this aerial view from Google Maps. In 1965, it was yet another business trip. He ended up having to go to the East Coast for Fairchild Semiconductor because it was based in New York. It was a division of Fairchild Camera and Optical, I think it was called. Yeah. And but he also had his first
major gallery showing.
Gallery show. That's right. At Grand Central Terminal, and then ended up being at George Eastman House. So this was actually a very big deal for him. Yeah. So again, this combination of technology and
that mid-century cool in that picture, man.
Oh yeah, incredible. Exactly. Everybody's trying to replicate that now. Yeah. But he just continued on with advancing photographic techniques, and it became an art form unto itself. These are just beautiful pieces. The photographs and the masks that were used for the photolithography for making this planar process were just incredibly beautiful. I love this picture of him and a colleague at the light table with all of these photo micrographs they were making.
It's awesome.
And he, so this was one great picture I want to talk about. So they needed some work for a company publication, And he had this idea for the world standing on top of integrated circuits, which was a pretty radical idea for the mid-60s when they barely even existed. But he directed employees to stand on the roof with his view camera, and you can see the black drape laying there in front of him. And so then they composited this with photomicrographs of various types of integrated circuits, and then it was used in a publication. And it said this collection of lithographic reproductions, the first attempt to provide the friends and customers of Fairchild Semiconductor with some insight into one aspect of our technology that keeps our people turned on, the often unexpected beauty that is revealed under the metallurgical microscope, the most common tool of our industry. So it was just like, again, this combination of art and technology. And he ended up getting the cover of Scientific American magazine in November 1965. And there was just opportunities for photographing things that just did not exist before. Here's silicon ingots waiting to be sliced in a process that also didn't just exist shortly before he made these photographs. Another innovation that also changed electronics at this time was the packaging of, as the density of these integrated circuits grew, they needed to be able to put more connectors on, more pins. And some of his colleagues invented this package, which became ubiquitous. This was invented in 1964, and here's some pictures that Dick took in 1967 to try to highlight what these looked like. But there's a lot of other things going on at the same time that Elrond's going to talk about.
Yeah, so and again, we get to showcase some of our newest processed color work from Dick that Heather's been working on. But I find it so interesting because at this, now we're fast forwarding, or not really, we're moving through the 60s, and we have reached 1968. And I think in some ways you can kind of see that Dick has been just through so much creative work, all this groundbreaking work, that I think he sort of needed to reconnect with his railroad photography roots. And so he embarked on this three-month tour, or odyssey, I guess is probably a better word, because he was keenly aware that the centennial anniversary of the first transcontinental railroad was coming. And so he decided to make this trip along the Overland route for 3 months to examine the impact of the railroad on its communities, on its customers. And then you can go ahead, Ken. Well, of course, there's those magnificent vistas of places like Sherman Hill, but then he also went to the small towns and examined not just Union Pacific, but other railroads that intersected with this route, and went into, he brought his photojournalism roots back, gave them a jump start, and explored the stations, the towns, the people, the railroaders. And just this is a great little flow of and of course the cattle, but I
just love how he captured every aspect of life, and that was his goal, was to capture life, of how life has changed in the 100 years.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really the best way to kind of sum this all up, is that he was looking at life, and this was a really big surprise, because I had never really seen a shot like this that Dick had done, and actually I don't have the details right in front of me, I'm sorry, but this was just mind-blowing of the shops, and I'm guessing this could be Omaha, but this could be Salt Lake, I don't know, but that's a DD-35 truck being worked on in the foreground, and then there's U-50s and other power in the background, and just that cavernous. It's absolutely a GE U-50 back there. I see questions in the chat. But what an amazing shot, where he's worked in the crew, the shop forces, the truck of another huge locomotive, and then thank you, Heather. I see she's chiming in that this is Cheyenne, so I can now confirm that. But just what a great railroad scene, that and to also have that in color gives it a whole different dimension. Just amazing.
And it's not just a bunch of equipment; it's
right.
Showing people working and just in their unposed, just in their capturing what they're doing in their daily lives.
Right. And it's that storytelling. That's what it really comes back to, is that Dick was always about the story. And I love these two. I definitely pulled these for to show you all. And I know a couple of these have appeared in his books, but I believe this was in Whistles Across the Land. I don't know if it's appeared anywhere else, but I mean, there he is aboard a railway post office, and he got access to get in there and photograph the, you know, the guys sorting mail and arranging.
It's so
everything.
secure. They carry guns. You see the gun strapped
Yeah,
to his.
they're armed.
They're armed. So you
Right.
can't just normally get in there.
Yeah, this was not, I believe the story was, you know, now we're in 1968 and this is all beginning to wind down. And I believe these guys were aware of this and kind of, you know, wanted someone to photograph this and preserve it for history. And so however it happened, you know, Dick was able to get the access. And then I just love that scene to the right, that little small town depot scene with a bullet, you know, the train board, and you know, the guy playing his guitar for everyone. I mean, what a magical scene, very 60s. And yeah, just you know, again, like you said, it's that storytelling. And I just wanted to add one last thought. You know, the bittersweet part of this is Dick kind of regarded this as a failure, and he, you know, he had to cut the trip short for various reasons. I mean, he still got 3 months, but he came back and kind of felt disappointed that he hadn't been able to tell the story. He kind of saw National Geographic as an outlet for a project that was in his head. None of that really came to pass, and he always kind of regarded it with a little bit of sadness that, you know, we've since learned. And to me, it's just, you know, it kind of breaks my heart to some degree, because I wish I could tell him now how moving it is to see these images and to see this slice of America that, you know, not everyone photographed. And the last point I wanted to make was just that, you know, Heather this is another shout out to Heather. When I asked for some photos from the 68 trip, Heather sent me about 600 images on contact sheets. My eyes just went, if you ever have seen instant glazing, they were like donuts. They were glazed donuts. I mean, I could not believe what I was seeing. There's so many images yet to come, but I think these give you at least a snapshot. But just really marvelous, magical stuff.
I found a pay stub that he came back to work from this leave of absence on it was October 31st, 1969, and then got right back into it, and they won an award. He and his team, his friend and colleague Larry Bender and Judy Horst, worked together on creating this artwork that was used in marketing materials, and they won an award that year.
Did you see they spelled his name wrong too?
Oh my gosh, I didn't notice that before.
I just noticed it.
Oh, well, I before E except after C, I guess so.
Yeah, it does kind of, and I noticed in the chat, Richard is saying how it almost has a Native American vibe to it, doesn't it? Isn't that amazing?
It reminded me of the artwork that was on the El Capitan cars and the Super Chief cars. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So Dick, this was the end of the 60s. At this time, it was a turbulent time for Silicon Valley, which it wasn't even Silicon Valley quite yet, but it was a time when many people were leaving Fairchild and starting new companies, including the founders. They had already left and started Intel. Intel was a fledgling company. So it's kind of the end of nearing the end of his time at Fairchild, but he was still really active doing interesting things. I mean, he wrote a script. This was a script for a videotape show for Fairchild marketing. And I thought this was such a great quote. What directions in computer technology can we anticipate in the next few years? Well, we're on the verge of a whole new thing. I mean, everyone will be using computers. I don't mean just institutions or large industries, but individuals. What a remarkable idea for 1969, right? Exactly. Now we have so many of them, we can't keep track of them.
Right.
But anyway, so this was something that he was working. You know, he was not just doing photographs. He was not just doing writing. He was even doing video production. But yeah, at the same time, he was still doing this. You know, this was another piece for Trains magazine, and this was a series he'd been doing for years. There's kind of two interesting things that he had told me about. That one was the noses of locomotives, the faces, and the other was what's on the other side of the tracks. And you'll see there was a great series in Whistles Across the Land, in other places too, where he's always photographing kind of what's on the other side of the tracks. So it was always these kind of he saw these kind of themes, and it's really interesting to see them together. Well, he and his friend Larry Bender left Fairchild at the end of 1969, and in January 1970, they started their own firm called Vender and Steinheimer, or Steinheimer and Vender. I love this this business envelope that I found, which was creatively printed. So you, depending on which way you chose to look at it, whose ever name started first. And despite the fact that they left Fairchild, they still did contract work for Fairchild and for other companies. And this was just when actually, so they worked together from 1970 to 1972. This was just literally when the term Silicon Valley was coined. It had already been going on for over a decade in terms of the silicon development, but that was when people. There was one reporter that Dick worked with, Don Hoefler, that knew very well. He knew very well. They coined the term Silicon Valley. And I thought this was interesting. So from Steinheimer and Vender on University Avenue, which turns out it's like a block that way. Their office used to be a block from me that way, which I was just amazed when I saw these addresses. I love this. He wrote to the president of Western Pacific Railroad offering to help with the application of semiconductor technology to assist with railroad safety. And this really was dramatically, I mean, nobody was thinking of this. Everything was the same old mechanical ways. And now everything is replaced with, massive amounts of semiconductors. And so I was going through his archives of photographs, and I found this Polaroid black and white proof. So very commonly in the days before digital cameras, you used Polaroid film to check exposure and focus and composition. And so this was a Polaroid. It was labeled Intel 1103, and I thought 1103, that sounds familiar. So I looked it up, and sure enough, that was the first semiconductor memory. And I Googled a little bit, and I found on Intel's website today, this is how they show what their history was, because Intel was really founded to create electronic RAM. And this is Dick's photograph in color. So I was holding the black and white proof, and they're using the exact the color version of that photograph. I thought that was great that it was still there.
Yeah.
So even though they had while Larry and Dick had their little advertising firm, Larry was the graphic designer and Dick the writer and photographer, they were hired by Intel to create the marketing campaign for something that was really remarkable at that time, the world's first microprocessor, which we just take for granted, but this was just something really remarkable at that point. And so they did all the artwork and they did the photography. They ended up doing the annual report in 1971, which was the first year that Intel went public. And when I was searching, one day Shirley said, I have this, looks like a script for something, but I don't really know what it is. It's a draft. And so I did some digging, and it turns out it wasn't a draft for a speech. It was a draft for a marketing video let me just do a little bit of trickery here for a second. This was something that Dick led, he wrote and produced and narrated.
The MCS4 microcomputer set is a family of 4 standard LSI chips with which you can build any number of powerful, proprietary general-purpose computers.
It's so cool to hear his voice.
It's so amazing to hear his voice, and also to hear his voice in this context. He's not talking about Southern Pacific or photography,
right?
But he's talking about very technical things which he understood. He learned it. He also did a bunch of ghostwriting for. I found some materials where some copy that he wrote for a disk drive company, actually. So it was he had really a broad range of capabilities. Yet he was still thinking about trains. So this was announced on November 15th, 1971. And I noticed on this box of prints in his darkroom, look at all these notes he scribbles on here. And I noticed that this is all about, these were photographs of the F units that were basically being replaced by new locomotives, the new generation of locomotives. And there's one that said built 1951, died November 16th, 1971. It actually died the day after they announced this incredible, mind-boggling new technology called the microprocessor. But at the same time, you can also get some insight into how he was thinking about how to pitch this. It's like, in an age of extinctions of species or period of extinction, and two new generations.
Right.
These ideas, he was working these ideas out just even in his mind. And it said, so last F unit on SP, deadline Roseville, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, I found this other folder, which, of course, that he was doing a piece for Trains magazine. And in 1972, the summer of 72, he went and photographed the new SD45 T-2s for Trains magazine. I found all these negatives in there, which the center now has, but it was of course, it was in a Fairchild envelope. So it was, again, this idea of technology and photography and trains, they were not separable in his life. It was always one. And there was just this, I remember as a kid seeing this magazine and just thinking about just what a great, like, it was just very detailed. He was thinking in terms of the hardware, but he did it in a very beautiful way. And then he captured some of these locomotives out in the wild.
Yeah. Awesome.
Another piece that he did at the same time was, he was very much into the Milwaukee Road, and this piece goes back to these photographs were the Milwaukee Road electrics, the box cabs, these ancient technology, just ancient locomotives. Kind of amazing that they worked. And he went out into this, the wilderness in this snowstorm. But it was a short story, but it was, I remember even as a kid reading this and just, you were there. You were absolutely there by reading what he wrote and the photographs, like that journalism background, that storytelling, it was just, this remains just such, even it's a short, but really powerful piece. And then this photograph that Shirley found, and she made some her own artistic interpretation of it, but he talked about this. It was spending the night out in the wilderness in the snowstorm, and he saw this glow from across the way, and it was just the headlight of the locomotive in the fog. And it's just, such an art, just so artistic. This is not a train photograph. But it captured what his time there was.
Yeah.
In late 72, he of course made another change, and he broke with Larry Bender. They remained good friends and worked together a lot after this, but he decided to join Regis McKenna as what did not seem like a really common thing that I would expect, but he became an account guy, and he did this press release, which kind of showed some of his humor. The press release was about him actually really getting a haircut, and because he was pretty shaggy apparently at that point, and he actually proved it by attaching some of his hair to the press release that he put out. And we could see this in this photograph by Bruce McGregor in the center there, 1972. I think this was at Niles Tower. But an important aspect was, so Regis was very, very, very important to the development of Silicon Valley. Now, and not only from his work at Intel, but I love this quote. When a young Steve Jobs needed a marketing expert, he called Intel to ask who made their sharp-looking ads, and they told him to go talk to Regis McKenna. Well, of course, Regis McKenna had hired Dick Steinheimer and Larry Bender to do that work. Right. So it was, he ended up doing a bunch of work for Apple, including this one Apple Buyer's Guide from 1984 that I found. Right. And then we move on to
circling back a little into the railroads.
Back into railroads in 1973 and 1974, he was very active, as that picture at Niles Tower showed. He was still very active in photography, and this is Elrond and I were both completely moved by this article. Again, this was a story where he literally took you along for the ride. And the first time my dad took me to Cone Pass when we were visiting my aunt in Southern California, I used this magazine as a guide, and literally it was him basically navigating and narrating to us what our journey was.
Right. And I lived at the foot of Cajon Pass. I was 20 minutes away. And when I saw this, I was like, wow, look how he approached it. He made it new to me. I was a young kid, but I was the local, and he made my backyard completely new and got me so excited to go out there and try new things.
One of the great things about this process is looking at, in fact, over the years, Shirley would occasionally find a photograph and say, have you seen this? And I'm like, no, that's amazing. And then it occurred to me, there must be way more pictures than are ever used in the magazine. And certainly there were, and we found this one, which was just a incredibly beautiful photograph to me. And I did this mock-up. I'm like, you look at it and you're like, I think he's thinking in terms of that could be an alternate cover, that could, and so I mocked that up. And then I realized, what, that angle and light looks very similar to two pictures that were published earlier that year in another huge article he did called California in Winter. And these pictures, again, could be used as cover shots. That incredible DD-40 UP shot, or the whole bunch of SP units pulling a train around Cajon there, were all very similar, and you started to see his thinking process. But it's also, everyone is influenced by their predecessors, and here Shirley had shown me this picture by Herb Sullivan on the left from 1952, and then you see this picture of the cover and you go, I wonder where that idea may have come from. But it was great because it's a completely different look. I mean, it's a completely different perspective with the long telephoto, and the light is different and so forth. So it was, but it was wonderful to see this. When I told Shirley that when she was going through the archives, if she could ever find this original Transparency, and she did one, she's like, is this what you're talking about? And it was interesting to see that it was crooked, and there was this power line, which I didn't even notice because it was kind of covered up by the masthead. Right. And so she removed the cable electronic with Photoshop, because she's like, well, Dick would have done that.
And we said, no, put it back.
No, then I want to see the original.
But then we got to hold the Transparency, and that was a whole different ballgame. That was a
whole other thing we talked about last year. Yeah. But then here's another amazing photograph from that same period, just that I'd never seen before. So I can't wait to see what Heather and Elrond and the whole team come up with finding what gems they keep finding with from these archives.
Yeah, just haunting.
Yeah, we have to get going. We're running a little late.
We don't want to keep you all forever, but we could do it forever, but we don't want to do that to you.
Dick kind of got sick of Silicon Valley, and he ended up moving down to Southern California. He loved the desert, so he spent a couple of years living in the desert, and which certainly, again, his work influenced his photography, because he came up with this epic, incredible photo story.
Right, one of those that still influences me to this day. I mean, just landmarks. And you could see, what the desert did to him.
The desert did to him. Shirley put this together.
Shirley showed us this when we were there last week, and we knew we had to use it, along with some of her words of wisdom.
It's but it was, he was quite the adventure out in the desert. Yeah. After a couple of years, he kind of did miss the action of Silicon Valley and moved back with Ford Aerospace to Palo Alto. And here is a photograph by his friend Kurt Fukuda. This was actually used this was staged. This was for a marketing promotional picture, and they just needed people, and so he, of course, was in it. But Kurt actually got to Elrond, why don't you tell this story? This is wonderful.
Oh, this is so amazing. Yeah, when I was writing the article in Railroad Heritage, our magazine, Kurt was so kind to share some of his stories about meeting Dick for the first time. And so, Dick was transferred from Ford Aerospace back to Palo Alto. And so there was this marketing team, and they were a very tight-knit group. And they heard about this guy showing up, and they're like, well, is he a good guy or not? And I'm paraphrasing, of course, but their manager, their boss tells them, well, in some circles, he's considered a god. He's a railroad photographer, and grown men weep at the sound of his name. And it's so, what do you expect? Well, Dick was so shy about it. He really didn't talk about trains that much when he first arrived. And so, but it began to get out there, and Kurt began to learn more about it, and about his hobby and his photography. And then he began to really learn what a genius he was, which is a word that will come into play in a moment. They went out for a weekend on Donner photographing. And so this is so amazing, because that page to the right is from Wheels Rolling West that Dave Stipe and Ted Benson did. And you could see, I've always loved that caption, the master at work. And Kurt snaps this picture of Dick taking the photo of the train on track 1 with the tunnel motors against the beautiful snowscape. And you can see that basically they shot like seconds apart. There's Dick's photo to the left, and then there's Kurt's photo of him making the picture. So they get back to work. The weekend's over, and all of Kurt's coworkers come up to him and say, "So how was it with Mr. Choo Choo?" And Kurt tells them, "I think for the first time in my life, I have met a genius." And then they became fast friends, and a partnership was born.
These are some of the work that that they did together. These kind of marketing materials and the photography and the writing. I thought actually Kurt just told me this today. He said on the backside of this this map they purposely included Berkeley because it represented counterculture, and he wanted to misspell it as Berserkly, but they decided that might be pushing it a little bit too much. But I thought that was an interesting little dig, and this was something that Kurt said was this was really a time when it was unlike at the other aspects of working in Silicon Valley. This was a very, very oppressive corporate culture, and everything had to be done in almost a military sort of way, and so it was very, very oppressive. And he left after a year to start this. He ended up starting his own photography practice, and this was his first studio.
Right.
And in fact, he invited Kurt to join him, and for several years, this was Dick in his studio in 1981 that Kurt captured. I love the you can zoom in on the nameplate. It's his nameplate on its desk says "Your Name." This is so this is the building. It's still there. I drive by it every time I go to Costco, and I drive by there and I think, wow, that's like where Dick and Kurt had their studio and did all this amazing work in the early 80s. But he, as he explained, as Curtis explained, Dick was always, he would just build whatever he needed for whatever, whether it was a prop or, just as we showed at Fairchild in the 60s, he would just do whatever was needed to go build something. And here's a great picture of him using a saw. And it was Kurt showing that the building is still there, and that was the office that they occupied. This was one example. I'll leave you with the example of this was the kind of innovative work that he was doing. This was 1982. They needed a photo of a vacuum tube. It was a high power vacuum tube that are still used for some applications, but it was with a transistor inside this tube, and he had this lighting. So this was 5 different exposures on a single sheet of 4x5 color negative material. And then it was used, and you can see in this magazine, RF Design. But this was the kind of stuff that would, be easy to do in Photoshop and probably even trivial to do with ChatGPT now. But this is the kind of thing in 1982 that was incredibly innovative. And we were speculating as to where he may have gotten the lightning pictures, and maybe that was actually from some of the lightning shots that he took out in Mojave Desert. One last picture I wanted to show. This was an example also. This was photographing the new electronic system, the computerized system that replaced the operators at Norden. This was I think in Roseville. And the photo on the left was using Diesels over Donner. And I just happened to see this print the other day, and I said, those screens look familiar. And it turns out this was the screen, but it was something that he had to capture, that he captured remarkably well because of his time in Silicon Valley. He knew how to do this sort of work. But at this time, he started moving towards just focusing just on commercial railroad photography. And Elrond, why don't you talk us through this?
Yeah, so, and you can kind of glide through these as I talk. So Dick, and this is probably good to hold on this for a moment, but what was so interesting is, Dick finally brought all of his experience and knowledge and his groundbreaking work, but also his knowledge of how to work with clients. He brought all of that to bear. And so Amtrak, Southern Pacific, Burlington Northern, TTX, these were all clients of his. And this was one of his huge shoots where they fought all kinds of horrible weather, but they photographed along the Columbia River Gorge in Oregon, and they got the sunburst when they needed them, thank goodness. But and Kurt shared this photo of Dick like hanging on for dear life, evidently as gale force winds were blowing at him. And so we can keep it gliding from here, I think. This was another assignment that Curtis told us about, where they were photographing in New England. And look how Dick took a whole new environment, and still that creativity shines through. I mean, look on the left with that it's so beautiful how he found a way to frame those trees with frame the train with those gorgeous colors and those golden leaves. And there's just enough room for that train to fit through without looking crowded. It's like he found just the right pose and obviously had that all envisioned in his head. And then he would pull back as well and shoot long shots where, you know, obviously Amtrak wants to sell the scenery. And so that's what they're promoting. And so now there's the train in its environment. But let's move on because I know we have a couple really good projects to show. He did a lot of work for Burlington Northern, and for their annual reports, he did the same. And this was just, we love this shot. We're not sure the exact date, but Heather believes it's 1978. But I love how he got down low and used the wheat to be an element as, you know, part of the picture of those beautiful green hoppers. And then as he was doing these official shoots, he would like wander along the railroad and shoot these amazing sunset shots. And this is in Washington. Oh my God, look at those colors. And I mean, you know, he had moved to color by this point where, you know, some rail fans thought that was heresy, but it was just a whole new world for him, a whole new canvas to play with. And look how he knew to play with those colors. And then he would do, you know, he was always famous for his night shots, but look at how he got more daring and gritty and kind of raw in a way, you know, where he was kind of pushing the boundaries again with, you know, time exposures like this, where it's more about the streaks of light and the color and the mood. And then I believe we go to here's his work for the Chicago Northwestern, which I really, really loved. These are just stunning shots. I mean, this is the Powder River Basin line. But, you know, I remember I've heard this from people where they say, you know, Western photographers have it easy. They have so much scenery, but a great photographer is a great photographer no matter where they are. And look how he plays with the light and the elements and the signals, the pole line. I mean, that golden light in Wyoming, how he finds roadside elements, shoots the 400 Club sign, but then of course he never loses sight of the people. And he always finds really interesting different angles to frame them in. And of course, that amazing light. And then these are great scenes too, where, you know, yeah, the lighting isn't spectacular, but you really feel like you're standing there with, you know, the station agent. And you know, he pulls back and includes the whole scene. And, you know, I don't know how much of this really happened during the 80s. I mean, I definitely grew up as, you know, admiring so many great photographers, but, you know, scenes like this still seem kind of rare to me. And then I think there's one more there's one more pairing that I put in. I love this shot of the yard clerk of Mike Wittenberg. Just what a great smile. And, you know, Dick was able to talk with everyone and he could get smiles out of people that, you know, some people, yes, it was easy, but with some folks, he just had this magical ability to draw a smile and a conversation and get them talking. And then he would just quietly snap pictures and get these wonderful moods. And then he'd shoot these dynamic angles of, you know, Northwestern ST40s at mines in Wyoming. So I think we have, so I can handle this. We had to profile a couple of his projects. There's two big projects, and this is when he was hired by SP to do the advertising photography to announce the merger, where SP was really being purchased by Rio Grande. But this was the artwork they wanted to. This was the image they wanted. They took a single or two single pairs, they had two strings of locomotives. And so Dick went up in a cherry picker, a huge lift truck, and he photographed the engines and arranged them, you know, got on his radio, you know, put down orders and asked for the engines to be moved around. And I actually had this funny little message from Shirley where she kind of explained the story, because Shirley was there. She had brought donuts and was kind of hanging out.
She was more than just a donut hauler, but she was
my God, yes.
Right? But it was, yeah, that's right. She had donuts to try to appease the crew. Right.
In this case, she wanted to, you know, she was just kind of snapping pictures because Dick was up getting the money shot. And so she said she was amazed to watch him arrange the locomotives into positions where they would be duplicated, you know, in the final ad. Well, then one of the SP units,
because let me just interject, because they didn't have enough locomotives painted in both of the paint schemes. That's why they had to come up with a way of making it look like they were, I guess, more further along than they were.
Right. I think they only had like so many locomotives available. I think that was the big problem. But yeah, so Shirley reported that a hydraulic system blew on the SP unit and oil sprayed everywhere. And somehow, I guess the truck was jammed and could not move. And so Dick and his SP, the person with him, they were stuck up there for an hour while freights rolled by underneath them. And of course, you couldn't just get on the cell phone and call. Someone had to run. Their SP handler, their PR person, ran off to get help. And so there's pretty wild stories behind these great images too. And then this is one of the other ads that Dick did. We can keep moving, I think. He was also involved with the shops, the Sacramento shops, and we'll find ways to show those later on, but there's at least a quick photo. Do you want to talk about the Pinole photo really quick?
Actually, really quickly. So this is a photograph I just loved. When I was still living in Chicago, a friend of mine ended up getting this calendar, and he's like, you gotta see this. It's a calendar by Richard Steinheimer. And I was like, no way. And so rushed over to his house and saw this calendar, and it was just such a perfectly lit. Everything was perfect about this shot, exactly what you would expect. And years later, I couldn't believe that I was actually able to hold some of the transparency of the images. But I was sitting at dinner with Shirley and Bon French and Phil Gosney, telling them about this story about how I love this picture and how then I got to see this whole story about this calendar. And Phil goes, "Oh yeah, I was the engineer on that one." And I'm like, "What? How is that possible?" So it turns out he was the engineer, and there was Dick, and there was Dick's friend Warren Marcus, who lived nearby. And we think that's an Amtrak employee in the back, and there's Shirley. And there was some notes about he had notes about the exposure and just written on a piece of scrap paper. And they ended up using it in their own advertising, which they well should. It was just a beautiful photograph.
Right. So yeah, this is the last ad that we really want to profile, and then we'll skim through. We'll just a few more minutes, folks. Thanks for hanging in there with us. But
yeah, this was, it. Thank you.
If you only knew what the original version of the show was. But this was the other ad we wanted to really profile. Dick had got the assignment from GE to get a very specifically planned photo, which would involve a fence in a certain position so that the train would be off in the distance. And so they had to build a movie set because there was nothing, basically it was a movie set, but they had to build a set with the fence that was constructed just for this photo shoot. And this is in Bealville in the Tahachapis. And so Shirley was documenting the whole process that they built all of this. And so she covered the horses that came in and, really loved the camera gear. The horses were really into it. But here's the final result that came out of this. They had the fence pretty much ready to go. Dick started doing test photos with some of the kids from the ranch house that he recruited to help. And then here is the final result. And obviously there's some little trickery that's been done for the final for the final train itself. But how amazing that they would build this fence in the middle of basically nowhere. And then I believe what happened is the ranch, the guy who owned the ranch just took all the wood and hauled it off. So anyway, just one of those amazing, only Dick and Shirley would be doing something like this. And so I think this is just to show you a couple of their examples of their other clients, TTX, but this is so amazing because, Dick actually made a TTX logo that he could fasten to the side of the piggyback car. And so because at the time they were introducing a new logo and he knew that wouldn't be on any of the cars. So he literally created a logo that he could fasten to the side of the car. And that way they could use it for their marketing and public relations, and it would be the modern logo. So that thoughtfulness is so amazing. But, Shirley and Dick really worked as a team, and these are some examples of the work they've done together.
Dick was trying to explain to the TTX rep, the treasurer of TTX, what to do,
right.
Here's what my vision is.
Right, exactly. And so then we'll show you some of the timetables. I was really struck by how many timetables Dick had the cover of, I mean, I knew he did so much work for Amtrak, but wow, his work appeared on posters and brochures, and then of course timetables.
And I thought it was really amazing to see this. It was 40 years after those pictures that Elrond was showing earlier, 40 years from the time that Dick photographed the F unit and the steam locomotive in front of the San Diego train station. Pretty remarkable.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they just so many calendars. There's so many timetables.
There's so much variety, right? San Joaquin's long distance trains. And so that is the official work. It's just a handful of slides, but I wanted to show that Dick and Shirley still had that mindset of working, you know, as far as if they didn't have an assignment, they'd create their own assignment. And so they learned that this shed was being rebuilt on Donner Pass, Shed 37. And I know some of you have seen these shots. I mean, they're just classics. Dick got himself into the old shed and got as close as he could to the entrance, and then let Amtrak's California Zephyr streak by so he could get the exhaust and catch the beams of light coming through the wood on the right. And they knew this shed was about to be replaced by concrete. So for several months, they had permission from SP to be there. And so they joined the crew, and they would drive up over and over and photograph various stages of the replacement. And the next slide shows the concrete being installed into the shed itself as kind of preparation for the concrete lining that it was going to get. And so look, it's just amazing. And then some of the wood itself had to be dynamited, and then new panels of concrete were put into place. And so Dick and Shirley shot all of this for several months without, you know, any assignment from Southern Pacific, but they had that letter that gave them permission to be on the property, and they endeared themselves to the crews. And so the next shot is just, we posted some of these photos not that long ago, and on our social media, Facebook and Instagram, and some of the family of some of the work of the SP crews were on there. And so we thought we'd show just a few more bonus pictures. That was Lupe Jimenez, who was one of Stein's favorite guys to photograph. But, you know, Dick and Shirley would go up and ride the snow fighting trains, document all their work, and they just got these magnificent, powerful portraits and, you know, great action shots. And it's just, you know, we're finding a treasure trove of these images, way, way more than we ever expected. And so I just wanted to share a couple of these with you. And then, besides the snow fighting crews, Dick was up there when these guys would break for lunch, and they would cook tacos and empanadas next to the tracks, and they would just set up a makeshift stove. And so I believe this is Jesse Avila in these photos, and they're just, you know, you could see the comfort level where everyone was very used to Dick and Shirley being around, and they were just, I imagine, part of the crew. So there's one last shot there. I hope you enjoy these last moments. And this is kind of our farewell to this episode of our travels with Steinheimer and Dick and Shirley. And I hope we could do more of this in the future. And we'll leave you with a little tribute that Shirley wrote up. You know, she would talk about how she and Dick would be driving, and she'd have a photo she'd want to do. And Dick would go, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. She would talk him into it. And then, you know, they'd get to the scene and he'd go, oh, this is pretty great. And so then he'd start shooting, and she'd be like, great, thanks. And so he would go off and take his wonderful pictures, and she would take her great pictures too. But then suddenly it was cool because, you know, now he was interested. So
I loved how she visualized this and how she captured this train coming through, just about to cross Canyon Diablo Bridge. Yeah,
the beautiful light. So thank you all for putting up with us and hanging in there for all of this. And we wanted to end with this. This is a beautiful little series that Ken shot of Dick and Shirley, and I just love them.
Yeah, and thanks very much to Shirley and the Steinheimer family and everybody who just and certainly the CRPA staff. Heather is doing an amazing job with materials.
We've been overwhelmed with riches, as you can see. I mean, we hacked this thing and edited as much as we could. There's so much material, and we're very excited to show you more in the future through our magazine and other publications and more online programs. And I do think that we'll have something coming up next September with Heather and I. Thank you again, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elle and Ken. That was stupendous, and I'm really glad that you guys were able to enjoy so much putting this together. And we really got to feel your excitement as you guys went along.
Oh, good.
Wonderful
Well,
to
that
learn
was-
a little
that
bit
was
more about
fantastic.
Stein.
Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you.
Mhm. So I don't
Thank
think
you
we
all for
have.
the- Thanks
Oh,
for all the
sorry.
nice comments. I'm sorry. I just want to say thank you for the comments. I've just seen a few, but we were.
It is nice to see the emojis continue to float up. Lots of little clappy hands. Keep them coming. Keep them coming. So unfortunately, I don't think we have time for questions, but if you have any, please feel free to email us at info@railphoto-art.org. We'd be happy to forward them along to Elrond and Ken. So I want to thank you guys again for putting together this fantastic presentation. We have recorded the presentation. It'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel in about 2 weeks' time. Again, that's youtube.com/railphotoart. You can find all of our past programs there. So lots to explore, lots to watch. Our next program will be next month, December 12th. It'll be one of our members only presentations, and that'll be a look at our Jim Shaughnessy collection, which we have been dutifully digitizing over the past few years. And we have a lot of exciting stuff to share with you guys. So please sign up for that. We'll get registrations open later this week. Reminder, it is members only. If you want to see it, we're excited to show that to our members. If you're not a member, consider joining. So thanks again, and we'll see you all hopefully next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again for a great show, guys. That was fantastic. And thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, Haley.
Thanks very much.